Thanks.
We're live.
Okay. Hey, everybody. It's Tammy here, your favorite hostess with the mostest. And of course, Henry Ball holding up the Free Mike Chapel button. We are still on mission here, even though we got something we did not expect last week hitting us right in the gut, right? So we are here to answer your questions and talk it out a little bit. You know, I haven't even expressed any words in this last week, to be quite honest with you. I was having a great day with one of my grandsons. I took him out for just a special time. He's 5, about to go to kindergarten. And that's when I got the good old news. And I'm telling you, I had to stop eating. I had to just take a breath because I thought I was going to lose it at the table. I had all kinds of emotions going through me and texting certain people. Of course, I had to let Jenny know. And wow, it was just like a sucker punch right there. It was a sucker punch. How about you, Henry?
Yeah, it's been a lot to process, and I to be honest with you, I think I was kind of just numb for a couple of days, and I actually met with our friend John Clark today to do a quick segment for one of his upcoming shows, and he also had the Georgia Innocence Project on, and so I was kind of talking to them and it's really just amazing. And I think one of the things that we talked about the most today, and it's not just in Mike's case, but it seems to be pervasive, that if the state makes a mistake, if the state wrongfully convicts someone, they make it literally nearly impossible for that conviction to be overturned. I mean, I wrote that article last week, sentenced to innocence. And, that's worse than being sentenced to life. I mean, typically, if you're sentenced to life, you have an opportunity for parole. But if you're innocent and you're in prison, you have almost no options to get out, because really your only way out is to
admit guilt.
Yeah, is to admit to something that you didn't do. And then, like in a case like Mike's, I don't think that would get him out of prison. I think that would actually give, Danny Porter, the ammunition he needs to go say, see, I was right all along. And, and no, he wasn't right. And I was kind of breaking down a little bit the case today for John Clark, or at least the ruling. And it really just kind of made me angry talking through it, because, and I think you mentioned it when you and I were talking, the ruling didn't read anything like any of the other rulings that this judge has put out. Both of the motions to dismiss, even the motion, for the, when they tried to bring in the impeachment evidence and all of that last minute.
He sounded like a highly educated man.
Yes.
He wrote everything.
Yes.
This was just all over the place, like a signal going, hey, this is not me.
Well, I don't know that, but I do know this, and this is kind of the, I don't want to say depressing, but the almost depressing part of it is that he wrote it in such a way that it's going to be very difficult to overturn at the appellate level, because the state of Georgia, like most states, puts the credibility issue of, the determination of credibility in the judge's hand. And so, the judge made his order predominantly about Tukey's credibility, even though he said, his reasoning was untimely and successive. That really doesn't go along with the order itself. But, he made the order really tied to Tukey's credibility. And some of the things he said are just absurd. Like, a couple of examples, he said that it was how did he say it? a preposterous notion that the witness or the victim would have been at a Roach Motel, a no-tell motel. And you know what? The first time I saw, the notion that she was at that, no-tell motel, it did seem preposterous to me. But it wasn't Tukey that first, indicated that might have been the case. It was Jack Burnett, because I read it in Jack Burnett's handwritten notes, the lead investigator. And not only that, I mean, he said she was in this particular room, and here's the person's name who's working at the front desk who corroborated that she was there. And then that person all these years later said, yeah, I saw her there with her umbrella. And not only that, I saw the black guy in the little car follow the police out of the hotel. And that's what the judge said. It suspends disbelief or whatever that a drug dealer would follow the police. Yeah, it's kind of hard to understand until you hear Tukey say, I will follow you. You are crooked, and I know you're up to something, and I'm suspicious of you, and I want to see what you're up to. And then you find out that the person that was running the motel that night saw him follow the police. So is it a preposterous notion? Maybe, but it's certainly not uncorroborated evidence. And it's certainly not a story that he just made up out of thin air. And then we get to the way he handled the crime scene.
Evidence. Yes.
Yeah, the way he handled the crime scene and the forensics experts. Well, they didn't go to the crime scene and inspect the car. So it's just speculation. Well, if that's the new standard, then there pretty much can be no experts in any cold case, in most cases really, but definitely in any cold case, because I don't know, out of the hundreds of thousands of expert witnesses that have testified in cases, for the history of our country, I'm gonna say that very few of them have actually gone to the actual crime scene. Why? Because most of them weren't part of that initial investigation. In fact, that's why they come in to give a fresh set of eyes and their expertise. And what do? They examine the record. They examine the photographs. They examine the physical evidence that remains, like the raincoat, for instance. And they discover on the raincoat that still is physically inexistent, that it's not consistent with the state's story in any way, because it never could have contained the type of blood splatter that the prosecution described to the jury. So literally they just made it up. And it's not that, it looked like blood to us. No, they drew a bunch of circles in a supposed pattern, and they drew those circles around nothing. So that is fabricated evidence. That's manufactured evidence. That is, that is, they just made it up. And so, I just still don't know how to process it. And, but here's the good news. You don't have time to process it, because we have 30 days from the date of the order. So we probably have about 25 days left to file a notice to the court, to the Superior Court in Long County, that we intend to appeal. And we have to file what is called a certificate of probable cause with the Supreme Court, essentially asking the Supreme Court if we are allowed to appeal. And that has to be done within 30 days. And, you don't get any extensions, and you also don't get any do-overs. It was said at one point, well, we can just file it and then amend it later. No, you don't get to amend it. You have to tell the court, these are our problems. This is what we want the court to look at. Now, how successful we're going to be at the state level, I don't know. But here's the bigger issue. We have to file it, or then we don't have a chance to file a federal habeas.
Yeah.
And if I'm being honest, I think that's probably our best route, but we can't go straight to it. We can't just file a federal. We have to go all the way to the state Supreme Court and either be denied or exhaust our efforts with the Supreme Court, and then we can file. And I have talked about the requirements of being able to file a federal habeas, and we would meet those requirements with essentially the same evidence that we've used in this previous habeas. The good news about that is like we can go in with the experts. We don't have to develop that. We have a very solid case for all of this evidence that I feel like we would be able to bring. But we got to go through the state first, and who knows how long that's going to take? Who knows how much that's going to cost? There's just a lot of things that have to be sorted out really quickly. And I don't have the answers yet. I can tell you that there was some conversations being had today, and hopefully I will know more tomorrow, and hopefully I will be able to update us next Tuesday, and we'll have some progress and some kind of reason to press on. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. I'm angry. I am emotionally drained.
Yep.
But
As we could, I mean, only the people closest in this mission with you truly understand the amount of work you've put into it. Only the woman that's in that house next to you really gets it. And we applaud you, April.
She went to her mom's. She said, call me when you're done.
She said, I had enough. See?
She's a trooper, and she has supported me. She certainly has gotten to a place where, she's not okay with the things that we've had to go through as a family. Because of trying to do the right thing. But she also understands that it is what it is, and we've had to do what we've had to do. So
right.
I will.
And I know personally, just in my household, it has affected my family a lot. I've got a 17-year-old, and so when all of this started, he was 12.
Yeah, which is where my son is now.
It's crazy to think that.
Yeah.
And I lost my father right at the beginning of this whole thing, and just lost my mother as well. And so many things have gone on, and my own heart has gotten involved, and I have had to push my family aside for many things, and they've watched me just being beat down, and how it has taken a hold of my heart. And yes, there have been times I have been angry too, and how it's torn up our family. Of course, the involvement with Eric Chappell working for us and being a friend of mine too, that was extremely difficult. So, they told me over and over and over, get out of this mess, walk away. It's time, and I would always say, well, God hadn't led me away yet. I don't feel like it's right, because just like you, it's the mission at hand that this person has been treated so unfairly. And what happened to him, it makes me just emotional thinking about it, but what happened to him is so wrong. And it didn't even matter to me, even up to the very end, that he turned his back on me. It hurt. Yes, it hurt. Like, hey, we don't need you anymore. We're going this direction. But I didn't want to leave the fight. I wasn't going, well, fine, I'll just, pack up my things and leave, because somewhere inside of me, and I know you too, felt like he's being used. He just doesn't understand. And even when he finally may have grasped some of it, I still don't think he has the full picture. And
Yeah,
nobody
and
can understand
at the end of
what
the day,
happened to you.
yeah, and at the end of the day, and I don't fault him for this.
Yeah,
I certainly wish none of the other stuff would have happened, because we had a big enough enemy, we had a big enough obstacle to deal with, to not have personal divisions or what have you. And at this point, I don't even really want to trudge that back
yeah,
up at all, any way, shape, or form, because it all came back full circle.
it did.
And if we didn't know who our mission was against and who we were fighting, well, Judge Karp showed us, because he used the same nonsensical arguments that I believe Danny Porter fed to Clint Malcolm, and Clint Malcolm went into court and said, "Well, Judge, these experts didn't investigate the car." Well, you know why they didn't investigate the car? Because GCPD released the vehicle, the victim's car, the crime scene, the car that the victim allegedly died in, 10 days after the murder, and gave it to her son, who happened to be their first prime suspect. So nobody from the Michael Chappell defense team ever got to investigate the crime scene. So if that's the standard, then Mike should have never been brought to trial, because Mike never had an opportunity to investigate, never had an opportunity to face his accusers, never had an opportunity to examine that evidence that the state had an absolute obligation to provide to his defense team. So that's critical evidence, and it's critical evidence that the judge says, well, if they didn't see it in 1993, then they can't have an opinion. Well, then nobody was allowed to have an opinion for the defense, so the whole case should have been thrown out. The whole case should have been thrown out, because we didn't get to examine the crime scene. And there certainly was information in that crime scene that the defense needed to have, which was pointed out by the state of Georgia's 20-year chief medical examiner, triple board certified pathologist, who said the blinker was on in the left position where she supposedly made a right-hand turn. Her seatbelt was fastened under her armpit, and not tight as if it had been driving. It was fastened as if somebody just loosely put it over her after they placed her in that position. The blood pattern in the car did not match two close contact wounds from a .38 caliber weapon, and there was blood inside the locked closed passenger door jamb. The former chief medical examiner for the state of Georgia, for I think it was 20-something years, said that to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, Imogene Thompson was shot at least one time outside of the vehicle, and her body was placed in the vehicle. The crime scene was staged. It did not happen in the time frame and in the manner that the state alleged. The whole case collapses. Not only that, they claimed Mike was standing there in his raincoat and pulled the trigger and got blood spatter all over his raincoat, and there was never any blood on Michael Chappell's raincoat. Also, they claimed her bloody purse, Mike took it off of her lap and threw it in his car and got blood in his car. And then they found the purse, and guess what? It also didn't have a speck of blood. A speck of blood.
We're getting into your book now. You don't want to give away all of the details. And this is supposed to be a Q&A, not a tell-all.
I've given spoilers pretty much every time, so I hope you guys will still enjoy the book. Give us a question.
Do you have a question here from Corey Scott? What was the judge saying about Bodie being charged?
So that's a good question, Scott. Corey Scott. Corey, and thanks for bringing that up because I saw that question earlier, and I thought, yeah, what exactly what was the judge saying there? Because that's one of those things I kind of read over it at first, and it really didn't register. And I saw your question, so I went back and looked at it, and it infuriates me yet again because essentially what he's saying is that Tukey, saying that he was scared of the police, he really had no reason to be scared because look, the police actually held each other accountable because Bodie Hearst was charged for his crimes. Now, what the judge omits is that those 11 felonies that he was charged with also got dismissed, and all he had was a misdemeanor offered plea, and all of it got expunged, and he got to keep the $10,000 that he stole from the evidence room, and the blackmail that he and his civilian partner pulled off against GCPD is not what I think any citizen of this country would call accountability. But the judge says, hey, Tukey shouldn't have been scared because, they held Bodie Hearst accountable. What? I'm sorry, what? Like I read that again today, Corey, and it just floored me. So, yeah, that's what the judge said. Bodie Hearst was held accountable. So, any more questions? I'm on a roll today. Sorry, guys. A little bit of a rant. I hope you'll forgive me.
That's okay. Well, this one is not so much a question, but it is a comment from William Hughes.
Yeah, I just read that. And William, I'm not going to say her last name, but I assume you know Dana. She worked at that repair shop. If you're talking about who I believe you're talking about, and they also reported, and this is not new information, but they reported it back then that he was essentially selling rides in that vehicle and driving people around Beaufort so they could see Imogene Thompson's blood in the vehicle. And so that's what happened to the crime scene. Instead of the defense being able to meaningfully examine it, if you had $5, to give to her son, you could ride around and say, "Oh, I got to ride around in the death car." Great job, GCPD. One other thing that Dana and a number of other people, including the guy who owned that repair shop that I believe you're talking about, said that at a party at his house, Michael Thompson, and there were multiple witnesses to this, literally said that I know Michael Chappell didn't kill my mother, but I need Michael Chappell to be convicted so I can file a $30 million lawsuit against Gwinnett County. And by the way, he did file that $30 million lawsuit. It got dismissed, but he wanted Michael Chappell convicted so he could file a lawsuit against Gwinnett County. And he said that he knew Michael Chappell did not kill his mother. So, thank you for that.
I'm trying to get some questions here.
We have any more questions, folks? I hope you'll all forgive me for my ranting tonight, but it had to come out at some point. So I will tell you this then, while Tammy's looking for questions. So I had finished the book prior to the ruling, anticipating a different ruling. And if the ruling had gone the way I thought it was going to go, then I was going to hit send the next day and Killing Henry would be at the printer. As it stands, I feel like, and I don't feel like I'm going to wait until the appeal and then what happens next, because that could wind up dragging us into 2028. Who knows? So I am going to go ahead and publish Killing Henry. my thought is, and it was, something I was mulling over today, that I really need to end it with, I don't want to call it a takedown, but I need to end it with my analysis of the judge's order. And I feel like that's not going to be, it's not going to be a very friendly analysis, if you will, because I feel like the order is just full of hogwash. And so I kind of feel like that's going to be the final word of killing Henry. So if you guys have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear from you. But killing Henry's on the clock, and it'll be at the printer very, very soon.
Awesome.
And then also on that same token, A Thin Blue Crime, the podcast, I heard the rough cut for episode 3 yesterday. We're working on tweaking a few things, and I was hoping to have the full rough cut today. But I got to tell you, a lot of you have asked me over the years, like, what did the jury think, and what did the jury hear? And I probably didn't break down as much of the trial in Michael Chappell, in the book Michael Chappell. I kind of focused on the opening statements, closing statements, and kind of what happened in the investigation in Michael Chappell. But in A Thin Blue Crime, we are basically taking you to the trial. You will hear what the jury heard, and we will break down that evidence as the jury heard it. It kind of in real time, and then you get to follow the investigation, some of the other investigations that occurred, but mostly my investigation thereafter. And I think that not to say anything negative about the previous podcast, because it was a great podcast, but this story is much more complete because the record is now complete. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to get into a lot of the things that first podcast wasn't able to go into.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. So coming soon, very soon. We had hoped to have enough ready to release here by the end of July, but I think we're probably going to be a couple of weeks into August, and then we're going to start dropping episodes. So
hold tight, y'all. It's so good. Hold tight.
A Thin Blue Crime should be coming to you within the next couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How many of his fire department friends are still sticking by him?
None of them have ever changed their story. And this is one of the things that you'll hear in the episodes. We talk about how Danny Porter kind of used and omitted their testimony. And I think it was only 2 of the firemen actually testified. And oddly enough, it was the 2 that were, that knew the least about that evening. Like the one guy was like, I was over in the other side working out. I came in a couple of times. I saw the guys there. But in his statement, he said the cops were there until after 10 o'clock. And then, the other one said specifically 10 o'clock because it's when I, went to the bunkhouse. And, none of the firemen, all of the firemen basically said Mike left between like 10 and 10:15. They all thought it was right around 10 o'clock or just after 10 o'clock. None of them have changed their story. And we've had a couple of them on the record. I've had, multiple conversations with several of them. And to my knowledge, they all still say exactly what they said back in 1993. And that's like that's one of the interesting things for me as we're breaking the trial down. Like, Danny Porter acts like, it's this vacuum. It's 2.5 years later. And well, you really don't know exactly what time they came in, do you? Because you were in the other room. Yeah, no, I don't remember now 2.5 years later, but 2.5 years ago, I wrote down on my sheet 10 o'clock, and I did that for a reason because, it was 2 days later, and that's what I remembered, and so it's just unfathomable to me. And it's the same thing with Rooster, Mike's sergeant. We have multiple statements. He gave a statement to Captain Davis and a statement to Chief White, or to Under Chief White at the time. And in both of those statements, he said Mike was there till 10 o'clock. And in one of them, he specifically said Mike was there. Mike left about 20 minutes before I did. And I went next door when I left to call my wife. And that call happened at 10:17, exactly 21 minutes after the dispatch call. So, Mike was placed at the firehouse by every single one of them until 10 o'clock. And that is the entire window of the murder. And so, as you've heard me say, to infinity, you can't be two places at one time. If he was at the firehouse, he wasn't at the Gwynco muffler shop. And of course, we have an eyewitness who passed a polygraph and said, no, Mike was not at the Gwynco muffler shop. But, I can tell you who was. And he did tell us who was. And the judge said, well, yeah. And I want to bring this out because this is another point. And I think this is something that would help us at the federal level. The judge says, it's implausible that he followed the cops and then, secreted his way up, to witness what happened, and then, hurriedly ran away in the darkness. And, you got to think, hey, I just saw a cop, shoot a woman. I'm definitely not going to hang around, right? That's actually the most believable part, is that he said, oh shit, and
got out of Dodge,
and then ran away in the darkness. But here's the kicker. Officer Rick Rosa interviewed a couple that was passing the muffler shop on the night in question. We assume around that time, because they didn't say exactly what time it was, but it was that night. They were passing the muffler shop, and they said they saw two white males running toward PIB from the muffler shop side of the road. Okay, well, who is that? That's the two cops running towards Tukey, looking for Tukey. And if it's not, then who was it? Then did they follow that lead? You got two white males running from the crime scene shortly after the crime takes place. Are we going to investigate that? No, because it doesn't match the story that, as Lieutenant Laddie famously said to Kendrick Dye, that's not going to help the prosecution. So,
right.
All right, I promise I'm done ranting.
So from
questions, guys?
Mark Moon.
Hello, Mark Moon.
So it's a shame Margie wouldn't back up Jermaine Rogers. She saw she was there. She should back him up.
Well, you and I know the inside story on that, Mark. And she did corroborate several key points, including the fact that she saw the black guy in the small car following the police out. So, yes, you're right. It would have been nice if Margie would have just came out and told us everything she knew. But she did corroborate a lot of his story. And certainly, when the judge says, well, there was no corroboration, that's just not true, because Margie's statements back in 1993 and even her statement today corroborates several key elements of Tukey's story. But I agree with you. It's a shame that she didn't step up. Another case of being afraid of GCPD But the judge said, oh, well, she shouldn't be because, Bodie Hurst got charged with, nothing. So. But thanks again, Mark. I hope you guys are doing well. A happy anniversary to you and your lovely wife. I think that was about
They're probably out racing cars.
Yeah. He's got a really cool racetrack. I got to go back. I got to take my kid back. He loved it.
Okay. Jim Stanfield wanted the $30 million lawsuit get dismissed. And did they know he was guilty?
I forget the exact reasoning, but Gwinnett County wasn't going to pay out a $30 million lawsuit at that point. Obviously they were continuing to maintain Mike's guilt, but I don't remember exactly why it got thrown out, but it wasn't a credible lawsuit, so it got thrown out.
Who rented the room at the American Inn that Miss Thompson was in?
Well, that is not clear. The name that was placed under Miss Thompson, we actually contacted, but that person was in the room next to Miss Thompson. And that person reports a very weird incident that happened that night. That person was a traveling salesman. And the American Inn, even though, the judge called it a Roach Motel and a No-Tell Motel, was actually a functioning hotel, roadside inn, and probably one of the, few places around Beaufort at the time that you could get a room for the night. And this guy said, I think he would, if I remember correctly, we found him in Indiana, and he remembered the night because he's been asked about it numerous times. He'd been asked about it by the police, and then he's been asked about it from a couple of different investigators, and then of course we found him. And he said that night that someone was banging on his door saying, "Come out, come out now, come out." And he was afraid. And he said, like, I don't know what you want or whatever. And a brick got thrown through his window. So Margie Wheeler moved him to another room. Imogene Thompson was in the room next to him in 103. And that's the room that Tukey identified to me 33 years later correctly, because it's also the room identified on Jack Burnett's handwritten notes. But I had wondered that myself. Like, I don't think the room was in Imogene Thompson's name, but it also wasn't in the guy's name that appears on Burnett's notes. I really probably shouldn't even speculate, but somebody thought that somebody else was in that room. And, they were banging on the door to come out and put a brick through that window, trying to get to the person that they thought was in that room. Now, is that related to, why Miss Thompson was at the hotel in the first place? I was told she was scared of her son. We have credible witnesses that her son threatened to kill her. And not just several days before the murder, but there was a kid on the school bus that goes through there, that told the bus driver, I think it was the day before or the day after. I think it was the day before, that he said that there was fighting next door at Miss Thompson's house, and he told the bus driver that Michael Thompson threatened to kill his mother. And the police had all that information, by the way. So, is there credible reason to believe that Imogene Thompson was trying to get away from her son? Was it because of the money she was carrying and she was afraid he was going to try to, take it for drugs or whatever, or that, he had just on numerous occasions gotten violent with her and threatened to kill her? So, could she have been there in fear for her life? Don't know. But but as preposterous as it is to believe she was there, she was there.
Yeah. All right. This one I'm going to post so that you will give an explanation for everybody to see. Let's see. Where did it go? Because I think this is very important. You explained it to me earlier, and somebody had already sent me asking again, or
yeah. And listen, I appreciate everybody's energy when they ask this question. And we've had to answer this question so many times. And I had this conversation directly with Governor Kemp. Governor Kemp was at one time following our case closely. He had assigned people within his administration to keep an eye on the case, and I put those people in touch with Billy Rennie. But the limitation that Governor Kemp, explained to me, I kind of already knew it when he explained it, but was that the state of Georgia is one of it's either 3 or 4 states that do not grant clemency power to the governor. So Governor Kemp cannot pardon Mike or anyone else. And then at the federal level, Trump does have unlimited clemency powers, but in federal cases. And Mike's case is not a federal case. Mike's case is a state's case. So any clemency in Mike's case would have to come through the state of Georgia. And again, the state of Georgia does not grant that power to Kemp. Now, there is a process in the parole, in the board of pardons and parole, where they have a clemency process, but it's very rarely used. And I just, unfortunately, I don't think it's an avenue for us. Kemp would have been the best avenue, I think. And if Kemp had those powers, I think Kemp would have continued to do his homework 3 years ago. And I think Mike probably would be home by now, but it's just not available to us, unfortunately. Now, can the laws be changed? Hey, if you know anybody in, the Congress, the state Congress, tell them they need to introduce a bill to amend the Constitution of the state of Georgia to allow clemency powers to the governor like virtually every other state. And so, if maybe that should be our next mission. That's a long road to hoe, but as it stands right now, it's just not an avenue for us.
Okay. Well, maybe this should be the last one, and it should have been one from the get-go. Why didn't Mike's case go straight to the GBI?
Good question. And part of the problem. Who asked that question?
Me.
Oh, okay. Good question, Tammy. In any officer involved crime in the state of Georgia and pretty much anywhere around the country, it's going to be investigated by an outside agency. There's all kinds of reasons, good and bad, that no agency should investigate itself. Mm-hmm. And, Danny Porter liked to say, well, that this was back then and that wasn't, a requirement then. It's simply not true. The known as the dark days in Gwinnett County in, I think it was 1964, 3 Gwinnett County police officers were murdered. And one of the suspects wound up being a former Gwinnett County sheriff deputy who also happened to be a former ATF agent. And immediately upon recognizing the law enforcement connection in those murders, the governor, I forget the governor's name at the time, but the governor issued an executive order because at the time, the agency that was involved, in other words, Gwinnett County, would have had to request for the GBI to get involved, and there was like this whole process. The governor issued an executive order, and it immediately went to the GBI. And that executive order said that any such case should immediately go to the GBI. Now, did that become law? Not necessarily. But here's the other problem for Gwinnett County, and I'm really just bringing that up because of the precedents, right? Because Danny Porter made it sound like, well, it wasn't a precedence in 1994 or 1993. Well, yes, it was. It was a precedence in 1964. So 1993, yes, it was a precedence. But it was also a requirement. And here's why it was a requirement. In the year 1993, shortly prior to all of this occurring, I think they signed it in February, the Gwinnett County Police Department received its accreditation as a professional law enforcement agency by I think it's the CELEA. It's basically kind of like post for police officers, or like the real estate board that certifies people to be real estate agents or whatever. It's the certifying agency that grants accreditation to police agencies. And Gwinnett County received its accreditation I think it was in February or March of 1993. And in their application, they had to agree that all conflicted investigations would be handled by outside agencies. So any investigation involving a police officer would be handled by the GBI, the FBI, the state patrol. And I've had other officers say, hey, if we had a car accident, we were calling the Georgia State Patrol, because you just don't want the agency investigating itself. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the biggest issues with this case. And they did it also with the Northside Precinct investigation. They did it with the Bodie Hearst investigation. They did it with, they kept everything in house. They did it with Officer Maria's investigation. All of that should have gone to the GBI, and literally none of it did. Mike used to like to say, he who controls the information controls the situation.
How were they able to do that?
What's that?
How were they able to do that?
Because it wasn't a law and nobody held them accountable. They should have lost their accreditation. I mean, but they didn't. Nobody's going to hold them accountable. What I was talking to the Georgia Innocence Project about today, John Clark asked, I thought, a pretty smart question, like, hey, do any of these prosecutors ever face any kind of accountability, when they wrongfully, especially if there's cases where they're hiding evidence and some of the things that the Georgia Innocence Project was telling us about today. And both of them said, unfortunately, no. Like she said, I can only think of one case in the state of Georgia where a prosecutor was, found to have committed prosecutorial misconduct, and egregious prosecutorial misconduct, where there was any kind of accountability. And I'm not sure if it's the one she was talking about, but I think it was the Ahmaud Arbery case. That's the only case I can think of where a prosecutor faced any kind of accountability. And it's a problem. It's a huge problem.
Very big. Yes.
And every case of wrongful conviction is not, well, my police agency set me up and, and I was the fall guy. I mean, there are legitimate cases where, we got the wrong guy. The wrong guy was in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was a misidentification or what have you. But even in those cases, the state does not want to admit they made a mistake. Like there was a case through the Georgia Innocence Project. It's one of their active cases right now. They arrested two men. There was two men that were responsible, and the person kind of said, well, they kind of look like they might be the people who did it. Okay, well then they did it. And so they arrested these guys. They tried and convicted one of them. And while the other one was being tried, they actually found the two guys that actually did it and arrested those guys. Guess who's still in prison?
Oh my goodness.
Guess who's still in prison? And they have gone through, I mean, I think he's been there for like 17 years.
Oh my gosh.
And the state knows he's innocent.
I think I may be familiar with that case.
Wow. So it's just it's just unconscionable. And so
yeah, y'all don't be doing anything wrong.
I mean, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You don't have to do anything wrong.
Don't find yourself in the wrong place.
Wind up accused of doing something wrong, and if they can do it to Michael Chappell, they can do it to any one of us.
Right.
So,
well, y'all, thank you so much for being here tonight with us, and we had some good stuff there to talk about. So join us next week, same time, same place, and we'll see what else we can come up with. Maybe we'll have another update about your book, what you ended up writing for us.
I better not write it tonight because I'm kind of on fire. So,
well, we appreciate all your questions, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Y'all have a good night.
Bye-bye.